Hello, everyone. We're here to talk about design to code and how we're going to build an app UI in minutes with AWS Amplify. I'm Renee. I'm a principal product manager at AWS. I specifically work on AWS Amplify Studio. And I'm joined here by Chris.
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Chris Woolham. I'm the tech lead for Amplify Studio.
OK, and we're going to go and jump right into it. I'm going to first talk about the design to app process. We have all this expectation that we have this idea. And we're going to work with a designer. They're going to talk with a front-end developer, get those changes implemented, and then work with the back-end developer to get all the cloud logic in there. And then customers are happy, right? That's super, super cool. But in reality, there's always a little bit of a tiny friction there. Because there's maybe additional changes that are coming from a designer to a front-end developer. There might be changes that are not possible, and it creates additional communication overhead. And this spirals just a little bit out of control, where everybody just starts talking with everybody, and there's this chaos, what's going on? And then this is the reality we live in. And we have actually deeply analyzed why there is this little bit of a friction there. And it turns out that, especially on the front-end developer side, they spend months pixel pushing. For those not familiar, pixel pushing is like literally changing tiny, minute UI changes just so it looks pixel perfect in the end. And then on the flip side, we actually surveyed designers, and it turns out 50% of them are not satisfied with the developers' implementations of those designs. This is a fun statistic to take back home for your retro, by the way. And so we live in a world where designers are not happy, developers are frustrated, and somehow there must be a better way. Somehow there must be a way where a designer can provide their designs, like they have designed in Figma, put it into like a little magic box, and then out comes React code that is super production ready and they can just use. And this magic box is Amplify Studio. And we're going to jump right into a demo to see how this works. So Chris, you want to showcase the demo?
Absolutely. There we go. So what we have here is a Figma file. This is a Figma file that a designer would usually give to a developer. And so what we're going to be building today is a recommendations app for Renee to both share his favorite restaurants and also potentially receive new restaurant recommendations. And so in here, we have our set of components. And so we have a basic app icon, a top bar. We have a location card. So for our list of recommendations, we're going to show that location card. We have a details card for if a user selects a recommendation and we want to get some more details about that. And then we just have this cool rocket, which is going to be there for our zero state. And so we also have our screens. And what our screens show us is how these components are going to be composed within our application. And so here we see we have our zero state screen, and then we have our selection screen as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this Figma file, and we're going to copy our link for it and hop over to Studio. And inside of Studio, we can click Sync with Figma, and we're going to paste that link in. Figma's going to have us authenticate. We've already done it for the purposes of this demo. And so once we authenticate, Studio is going to start processing those components in our Figma file. And we have the ability to accept or reject all these different components that we have. And so we have our app icon. Here's our rocket. Studio not only imports layout components, but also vector graphics like this. And we also have the ability to accept or reject changes on a per component basis. This is very useful for if you have some components that are finished already, but maybe some of them are still being iterated on, and you don't necessarily want to import those yet. So we're going to go ahead and accept all of them. We feel pretty confident about this.
Yeah.
And so now we see here that we have our components in our component list here. So let's go ahead and use them in our application. So we're going to hit Configure, and we're going to get our component code. And the first time we use Amplify in our project, we go through a little bit of an initial project setup process. First thing is installing our Amplify CLI, which we'll use to generate our components. And then we have a couple package dependencies for handling things like styling and data access. We've already done that for the purposes of this demo, so we can skip to step 2 here, which is just configuring your app to use Amplify. And so in our index.js file, we're just going to paste that in. And then the last part of this is wrapping our app in the theme provider. And what the theme provider does is it ensures that we have all the proper styles for our components so they match what we have in our Figma file.
And you're just pasting this into a standard Create React app, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is an app we created with Create React app. We're just using Webpack to serve it.
Super cool.
Very standard. And so now we've got our project set up. We're ready to use these components. What we're going to do first is we're going to use the Amplify CLI, and we're going to start pulling those components locally. Sorry, this is a classic demo situation here. Oh, that's why. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and pull our components here. And we don't need that.
Oh, did you authenticate
Yes.
CLI?
So let's authenticate.
So this is how you know it's a live demo, by the way. We built in these errors just so it's really, really convincing, okay?
There we go. Yeah, so the CLI is going to authenticate the first time. And so we say, yes, we do want to authenticate. And we can return back to our code page. And so we just have to answer a few questions here about how our project is configured, what kind of frameworks we're using, and then simple things like what are our build and start commands. And we're ready to go. So you can see here that the CLI is now generating our UI components. And so if we open up this folder here, we can see we have our list of all of our components. And we'll keep that going. So the first one we have here is our top bar component. And what Studio generates is semantic React code. So as a React developer, you can look at this, understand what's going on, and feel like it's a component that you've written. And we also provide typings. So as you're working with the components, you'll get helpful
Auto-completions,
auto-completions
right?
that you can use.
And the good thing is these typings also work with pure JavaScript projects. So you don't need to use TypeScript to leverage all of these nice little intuitive improvements as you're coding.
Yeah, and in fact, this project is a JavaScript project, and we'll see that.
Right.
So next step is to import our component into our app. And so we're going to add this right here. And then finally, we're going to actually render the component. And so right here. All right. And now, there we go. So with 2 lines of code, we were able to get a pixel-perfect component into our application. Now you might be saying, hey, Chris, yeah, it's pixel-perfect, but it doesn't quite fit the page. And yeah, that's correct. So for Studio, there's not a good way for us to know that a component needs to fit its parent. It's going to be rendered as it exists in our Figma file. But Studio components are extensible and configurable. So we can just use any standard properties we'd use with our React components. And now we have a full width top bar.
Wow.
So,
can you prove it by actually resizing it?
Yes.
Okay.
So real quick, before we do that,
Okay.
I want to take a look at the top bar again in Figma here. So when if we look at it here, we actually have 2 different variants of our top bar. We have a standard one, and that's the one we're seeing now. And we also have a smaller one. So for smaller screen sizes, we want the header to be a little bit smaller, just so it's not taking up as much space. And we've defined those as variants with a breakpoint property, and we define it as the larger one, medium screen sizes and up, and then the small one is for small and down. So if we go back to our browser here, we can actually see that as we change the size of the screen, that's happening in real time. And it just worked. We didn't have to do anything extra. So the great thing here is your designs are responsive just by configuring them in Figma.
My favorite part of all this is actually there's a super smooth transition as you decrease the window width. Can you do that again? Do you see how the font size just smoothly animates? Ugh, it's amazing. I love it. OK.
So now that we've gotten that in, let's go ahead and start adding some other components here. So next one we're going to go with is our locations cards. So let's go ahead and add those in here. And we'll add a few of them. Oh, what have I done? There we go.
Does this feel like a coding interview yet?
It does. I'm stressing up here. All right, so we have our locations. There we go.
That's pretty cool.
So we've added those in. We're getting very close to our our first Figma screen here. So looks like all we have left is our rocket. And we're going to go and add that in right here. And there we go.
Pixel perfect.
Pixel perfect. So in about 4 minutes, what we've done is gone from a Figma design into a pixel perfect static app.
Yeah. And you get essentially these components as real React code. They look exactly as you anticipated. So just to recap, to go from design to code is now as simple as just import, export, and copy and paste. And this is really just the first part of making sure that you can go from a design to an app UI. Because you might be saying, but wait, there's so much more to building an app. Yes, there is, because this was just a bunch of like visualizations and stuff like that. There's a lot of cloud logic, there's data, authentication, all these different factors involved in building an app. And we're going to look at all of that in this talk. So let's first take a trip down memory lane and look at the evolution of the front end. So a long time ago in 1989, the World Wide Web and HTML came along. And luckily, there were a few innovations since then, because we are all very happy for them. With AWS EC2, we can now host web servers much more easily. iPhone ushered in like the mobile app revolution. Node.js is also super cool. Now you can just write JavaScript in both the client and in the server. And also React, these frameworks have brought componentization to web development. And the impact of that is pretty apparent if we just do like a before and after real quick. I still like the Amazon.com OG website, not gonna lie. But nowadays, instead of static content with hyperlinks, we can get really rich, performant, and responsive web apps. And these web apps are, the reason why they're so good now is because you can take advantage of the full stack, right? What is a full stack of an app? So shout out to Chris Coyer from CSStricks.com. I got the slide from him. The full stack means you need to go from all the way from the back end to the front end where the UI is rendered. And there's these different technologies that are involved in there. And there are 3 key technology evolutions that have really made full stack app development significantly easier. First part is serverless. You can scale down to 0 or scale down to any number that you care about. With Node, again, same language on the client and on the server side. And with GraphQL, you now have a great way to even define APIs where your front-end developer and your back-end developer can operate independently as. And one interesting factor of all these innovations is what we're seeing is that front-end developers are increasingly responsible for building the full-stack functionality. So they start making a lot of decisions around the cloud as well. And that is exactly what we built Amplify for. So Amplify, outside of Studio, the bigger picture, we have built it so we make it easy for front-end developers to build full-stack apps, okay? Now, there's a lot to unpack here in terms of what does it mean to build full-stack apps. So we're going to take a quick tour of Amplify. So there's going to be 3 things that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to see how we're going to go from that static app that we just created, building UI, to layering in more cloud capabilities, backend capabilities, connecting the UI to the cloud. Then we're going to see how we can ship our application to globally, hosting it with Amplify hosting. And then also how to scale it further for production, because that should always be on our minds as we're building things. Now, as we talk about building UI, the convenient part of our previous demo is that we had a designer. But a lot of developers don't start their first iteration with a designer. That is just not how all the organizations work. So our philosophy is that every app deserves good UI. So we have provided an entire toolkit to make sure you can build beautiful UI. We start with UI primitives, which are like buttons, text fields, all your usual suspects to make sure you have a great cohesive UI library. And then we have a theming capability that can style these components to match any brand. And I really mean any brand. You can play with it later. And then the last part, there are some components that are better driven by code than by design. And this is a very interesting area. For example, when you are logging a user in with the username, password, and all these things, did you know there's like around 27 different states to manage? The designer is not going to necessarily design 27 different states unless it's their full-time job to build login screens, right? Like user confirmation, multi-factor authentication, it's a lot. So there is an opportunity here for us to make sure that is easier to do. So we can just give you a login screen component that works with your backend. So let's take a look at what that means to build some UI without a designer and how that impacts the app.
Sure. So what we're going to do next is add some authentication to our app. So in our app.js file, we're going to add a higher order component called withAuthenticator. And we're just going to wrap our app in that. And let me make sure.
Did you have a typo there?
KTOR.
Well,
there we go. And let's go back to our app here. And just like that, we already have an authenticated application.
Should we do the demo again? Because that was so fast. So 2 lines of code, and we instantly build out an entire login screen. And you can actually click through some of the items. Like if you do create account, there's actually the whole setup flow of making sure confirming your email address, and all that stuff is built in with 2 lines of code. And the other fun part is it just knew to use email, right, as a login mechanism. How's that?
Exactly. So no additional configuration required in your app. We were able to do this within the Studio application. So what we did before the demo was actually go ahead and configure this auth ourselves using email and password. But we also have the ability to use a phone number, federated authentication with social. And so there's a lot of opportunities here to configure your auth. Under the hood, we're using Cognito to manage this authentication. But if you have your own Cognito user pools, you can bring those as well. So lots of opportunity for customization here.
Yeah, the good part is because Amplify understands both your backend and your front end, we can make sure that the UI experience is just seamless. So that is good. Do you want to go and talk about data?
Yes.
Okay. So off easy, never said before until today probably. So now let's switch to data. So with Amplify Studio, we're also giving you a mechanism to set up your data model. And you can start visually and then continue in code. With the visual way, it's just an easier way to get started. You don't have to fully understand all the technologies under the hood, but you surely can if you want to. So we give you a visual way to model your data, and under the hood, we deploy a GraphQL API, and that is backed with DynamoDB as a data source. And you can set up authorization rules based on top of them. You can look into the application's backend database and check out if all the data is correct. It's great for debugging. And then also you can connect the data to UI components. Now let's kind of take our app that we've gotten to this stage. We've got the login working, which is great. And now let's try to figure out how can we bind all these locations to actual restaurants that I recommend.
Yes, absolutely. So to get started, we actually have already pre-configured our data model. We have a recommendation here with just a few basic fields: name, description, address, a latitude and longitude, and a cover image. And we've given them some respective types here as well: string, float, AWS URL, whatever makes sense for your data model. And the cool thing here is that I didn't need to know GraphQL at all. This was all done visually. Studio generates the GraphQL for you and deploys that as well. And so we have also gone in and created some records in here already. Let me delete this one. And so we have 6 records in here, and we're going to use these for our initial app.
Cool.
And so what we need to do now is we need to configure these components that we have imported to actually bind to real data. And so if we go back to our UI library, and we're going to do this to our details component first. So we go and configure it. And configuring this is as easy as clicking on the item you want to bind and adding some properties for it. So in this case, we want to add a label. And we're going to bind that to our recommendation name. And Studio is going to create a property for that, so that's how we're actually going to bind that in our React code. And we can continue doing this with other properties as well, such as our address and our description and our cover image. There we go. And the really awesome thing here is that as you're doing these bindings, Studio is pulling data from your data store and showing it to you in real time on your component. The thing that sometimes happens is you'll get designs for your application, but those designs will be very specific to a certain text, a certain number of characters. What we get here in Studio is the ability to preview what your components are going to look like with data that actually exists in your system. And so we can actually go through and shuffle through all this data and make sure everything looks good. So now that we've done the details component, let's go back to our location component. And we're going to configure that, set up the name and the description. There we go. And so now we have those 2 components set up. We could go back to our app, pull that, and go fetch our own data, map it, set up our components like that. But there's actually an easier way for us to do that. And so in our designer here, we can actually create a collection directly from our component. And so we're just going to use the default name here.
Yeah, so this allows us to build the left-hand navigation bar, right? With all the locations. Okay.
Yeah, so because this is, actually, let me sign.
Oh, do you remember your username and login for the demo? This is high pressure. Did you have caps lock on?
Nope.
Okay.
Did I?
Yes!
Okay,
Great.
First try.
Okay.
Whew. One hurdle at a time.
Yeah.
All right, so our location collection, you can see here it's loading in data. We didn't have to do anything else. We can customize it however we want. We can make it a list like it is now. We can do a grid. We can change our different layout options, or even include search and pagination, depending on what your use case is. Yeah. I think I'm happy with how this looks.
Yeah, maybe we want to sort it like
the
most recently created ones or something like that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll do that descending.
Descending is probably good, yeah.
All right, so now we've configured this component. Let's go ahead and use it in our application. And so, again, very familiar process. We'll do a pull. We're going to add a line to import the component, and then one to actually render it. And so while we kick off the pull here, let's go ahead and start implementing this component. And so here we will add a location collection. And let's just make sure that we import it. And we're going to see it start appearing here on the left side. And there we go. We have our types.
Cool.
So if we save this, There we go.
Wow. And this is from like live. It just pulled
Yep.
everything.
Just worked.
You didn't have to write any code at all to fetch the data.
One line of code, everything loaded, just
That's
works.
Pretty cool.
So let's take that a step further. We are going to go back to our content system here. And we're going to add another record. So let me just get this URL here.
Okay.
And we're going to create a new recommendation for the Amplify nacho bar.
Makes me super hungry.
I know. Now I want nachos for dinner.
We should do some swag with Amplify nachos, I think.
All right. And we'll paste in an image. All right. And we'll save that recommendation. And what you see on the left here is that loaded in real time. So not only is it pre-configured, but it's pre-configured to be real time and offline.
And traditionally, writing this kind of like fetching code, managing the state of these events coming in to do the real-time capabilities, we've been like hundreds of lines of code, right? Just for this one component.
Easily, yeah.
Right?
So now that we have that, let's continue building out our application. So first thing we're going to do here is start adding a little bit of state.
Yeah, I think we want to make sure that when you click on an item, it actually shows some details around it. Because right now, we still have the granted super cool rocket, but we do want to make it a real functional app.
Yeah. So, OK. So let's go here. We're going to console log this just so we can see what's going on. And within our locations collection, we also have that same extensibility that we had with our other components. We have the ability to override individual items within that collection. And so the nice thing here, we're getting these suggestions, makes it really easy to work with.
Types are awesome.
They are.
That should be a t-shirt.
And so if we add this in here, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to configure an on-click event. And we're going to say, when the user clicks a specific location, we're going to set the selected item to the one that they clicked. And we're going to save that. And if we go back over here and open the debugger and start clicking around, we can see here, yeah, it's definitely working. We are updating our state. Clicking works. But we're still just showing our zero state. Now we actually want to show what the selected item is, get some more info.
The details,
the
details card, yeah.
So let's add in our details component.
What I really like about this mechanism is that you can really mix and match these React components like as if you've just written this React app from scratch. Like setting these states, managing the click events, and so on and so forth just feels natural, right?
Yeah, it's just very familiar. So now we will close this and start clicking around. So there we go. We have, now with just a few more lines of code, we've gone from having our static app to an app that's actually loading in our data.
Yeah, it's super, super cool. And this is like how many lines of code?
Altogether, 42 lines of code.
I think that's a pretty big win.
Yeah, things we've actually written, 10, yeah.
Yeah. You want? Okay, so now this is cool, but let's make the app even cooler, right?
Okay.
What is a recommendations app without any sort of location capabilities? We need to show a map of where the places are at.
Exactly. And so along with our auth and API categories that we've already shown, we also have this geo category in here. And we pre-configured that. But what this does is it gives us access to Amazon location services. And so configuring this is actually as easy as doing Amplify add geo.
And I think a good call out here is Amplify Studio is a visual tool, but you can always use the CLI as a companion tool if you are more familiar with CLI.
Yeah, and so when adding geo, you have the ability to add map, location search if you want to find places or addresses, or even geofencing. And in our case, we're doing a map. You can give it a specific name, and you can configure authentication for that.
But we already have a map configured in our demo already, right?
Exactly. So we're going to cancel out of this. We're good to go.
Okay.
And so what we want to do next here is actually add in our map component, since we've already configured it. So we're going to go up here and add our map view. And I'm going to cheat a little because you all don't want to watch me typing.
No way. Really?
And so we're going to go ahead and do our details component down here.
And use a little snippet. Is that what you're doing?
Yes. Yeah. And so we'll go ahead and set that. And so you can see here, really all we've done is just set up a view, and we've moved our details component down a little bit.
Okay.
But in general, not a lot of code that we've actually had to write here. And so we're also going to add in our map view. And so you can see this is the code we've actually changed. And
the map view is like the authenticator. It's a component where a designer cannot design all possible streets and maps. You know, like it's some components just much better in code first, right, than from design. Yeah.
Exactly. And so last thing to do here, so what we're doing essentially is we're going to show a map, and then we're also going to show a marker, so we know exactly where on the map this place is located. And so let's go and import our marker. And there we go. And so now we can go ahead and preview what that looks like. Okay. And so if we select our location
Moment of
here,
truth. Is it loading? It is
There we
working.
go.
There you go.
and so we can click around on these different items, and they just work.
They just work, exactly. And I think on top of them just working, they are quite legitimately pixel perfect. That's exactly what a designer wanted.
Yeah.
So hopefully your designer is going to be happier after this as well. Okay, so that is super cool. We've got now all these visualizations making the app really rich, leveraging cloud features. But the use case isn't fully complete yet. We've currently only been looking up new information. But I also need a way to create new items from my app, right? We did it right now in the previous demo from like the content tab, which is kind of like a back office view, but we want to build it into the app. So that's why I'm super happy that we have launched Amplify Studio Form Builder this month. It is a new way to build React forms for any APIs in minutes. And I really mean any APIs. So what you can do is you basically tell Amplify Studio, what is the data you want the form to produce? And then working backwards from there, we will auto-generate a React form that will produce exact that data shape. So just provide your JSON object, and we're going to make sure the React component, the form, will produce that JSON. We're going to see how that works in a bit. And then the other part of it is we allow you to visually, very quickly rearrange things with drag and drop, add common validation rules as well, like for emails, URLs, and so on and so forth. But we don't want to make the visual editor the only way to edit these things. So you can actually continue in code at any time as well. And so you can extend these validation rules, and to get super nerdy for a second, you can actually run asynchronous validation rules. So if you have to go call an external API, verify against that, and then show the form state, you can actually do all of that as well. And of course, it works with all of our UI library systems as well. So the theming and all those capabilities stream right through.
Built in.
It's all built in. Let's take a look.
All right, so we're going back to Studio, and what you'll see here is we actually have two forms already created here. Now, the thing to note is that we didn't create these forms. Studio looked at our data models and created these forms for us. It created these forms before we even knew we needed them. And so we're going to go and configure these. And the thing that's really nice here is that Studio has generated human-readable labels from our field configuration. So it's translated some of the Pascal case to sentence case, and it also infers the field types based on the data types. So in this example, the cover image is a URL field because the data type was AWS URL. Our description is a text field, and then our Latin long fields are number fields. So this is a good start, but let's customize it and make it our own. So what we're going to do here is we're going to drag and drop our long field to be next to lat, and we're going to give it some proper labels. We're going to say latitude and longitude. And for our description, It would work as a text field, but it's going to be better represented as a text area field, I think.
I agree.
And so along with these different field types, you get built-in validations. So depending on the field type, you'll get some reasonable defaults. So the URL field, for example, will ensure that the user's actually entering a valid URL. If you want to add further validation customizations, you can do it visually, or you can do it in your app as code.
I think the success metric for this product is how much time we have saved people from looking up regex, because I always have to use Stack Overflow for that.
So we're good here with customizing our component.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and pull it local.
Oh, it's like the same system, just pull, import, render.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so while that's going, what we're going to do is we're first going to add in a button so that the user can actually add new recommendations.
And this button is from our UI primitives library, right?
Exactly. We're just importing it. It matches our styling automatically. If you've set a theme, that's just applied.
Cool.
And so we're going to add some additional state here. So we're going to have a separate state here.
To decide when to show the form?
Exactly. Right? Usually we'd probably do this with a router, have a completely separate page. Yeah. But for the purposes of this demo, let's just do it as a state.
Yeah, I think we have a hard limit of 100 lines of code for this demo, right?
Yes. OK. And so for our button, we're going to add an on-click event. And we're going to set our create mode to true if the user clicks it. There we go. And so there we go. So we're adding the button in. There we go. And it looks good. And so now we actually want to wire this up so we render our form. And so again, I'm going to cheat a little bit with some snippets. And there we go. And so this is our form, and we're going to conditionally render this depending on the mode that the user has selected. So we'll add our import for this up here. And we're going to say, in create mode, we're going to show this component. Otherwise, let's show the other one, our existing view functionality.
We should probably clean this conditional up after the demo.
Yes. No. And so if we click new recommendation, there's our form.
Perfect. And it rendered exactly as we anticipated it to be, right?
Yep. There we go.
Okay.
And so we have the form showing, but right now, if I click any of these buttons, we're not going to go anywhere. We're stuck in this state. And that's not a good experience. So let's go back to our form. And we have the ability to hook into different events. And so on cancel is a good one that we can use for this. We also have on change, on error. There's a bunch of different stuff depending on what you want for your form. And so for our on cancel event, we're going to go back to our just standard mode. So set create mode false. And we're also going to do the same for on success.
And on success fires when?
So that's going to happen after data is submitted,
okay.
and it has passed validation, and you have a new record in your database.
Cool.
All right.
Success, not submit.
Oh, that's
See, right. I'm a PM, but I know how to code.
There we go. OK. So we'll go back into our new recommendation here, and if we click cancel, there we go.
Yeah, it works.
It's out of our mode. But let's do something cooler. Let's go ahead and actually create something. And so, what food sound good? What other food sounds good?
I'll be down for sushi right now.
Sushi.
Let's do sushi. And you know, we didn't prep this because it didn't show up in the suggestions there.
There we go. And we'll save that.
Great.
There it is.
So these forms are not just UI. They are actually also calling the APIs to creating these records, right? So you don't have to manually worry about, oh, what's the API endpoint? How do I set the authentication header again? Oh, what is the exact shape I need to submit? It's doing all of that for you. But we also support creating forms for any API, not just the ones created by Amplify. And we can maybe also show that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So by default, we're going to get these forms that were auto-generated, but you can also start with a blank form and visually customize that yourself, adding new fields manually, moving them around, dragging, dropping. If you have other forms, maybe you want multiple forms for the same type of data model, you can go ahead and do that as well. And then finally, you can paste in a JSON object. So say that you have an endpoint for creating some sort of data model, go ahead and paste that JSON in there, and Studio is going to generate that form for you with the same label inferences, type inferences based on the data types in your JSON.
And then on submit, that event will just give you that JSON object. You can forward it to any API you want, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Let's come back to the slides. Oh, sorry, these are the backup videos. Okay, so we have now built this app. We have completed the whole lifecycle. You can read things, visualize things, use cloud, create items. Less than 60 lines of code? 70?
Oh.
Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, it's a decent number. And so the next question is, how do I ship it, right? And that is the second part of Amplify's story. We actually have a service called Amplify Hosting, which is a fully managed CI/CD hosting service to host any static web app, React, Vue, Angular, all your usual suspects, and also Next.js 12 and 13 server-side rendered apps. With Amplify Hosting, as a developer, you just have to bring your Git repository. We're going to auto-detect your entire build settings and handle everything else for you. So that is literally it. And it also has some other cool features. As a PM, my favorite feature is pull request previews. So whenever a new feature is getting in PR, I actually get a special domain to play with it. And then, I get to talk to Chris, and, we'll have some discussions. And then we get to merge it to production afterwards. And also, you can integrate it with your own custom domain. So if you ever had a headache setting up SSL certificates, well, with Amplify Hosting, it's one click. That is going to be super easy. So try it out. And we can take a look at a video of how to do that, right? So in the workflow today, what we can do is go to our Amplify console, which is inside the AWS console. You can just click host your web app, select GitHub in our case, right? We uploaded this code, we pushed this code to GitHub earlier, and fancy loading screen. There you go. And then we get to pick the repositories from my GitHub account. So this is the repository for this app that we just showed you. And we're going to pick the branch that we want to host. And when I click next, Amplify Hosting is automatically going to detect all the build settings. And I can just click Save and Deploy. And that is literally it. There's nothing for me to configure. If you're just building a React, Vue, Angular, Next.js app, we automatically detect the build settings. And after a couple of minutes, we're going to create a domain for you, so you don't have to manage anything yourself there. We're setting up the SSL certificates, go through all the build for you, and effectively at that point, you can get the build, click on the URL, and run the app. And this is actually the code that we just showed you running inside our domain, amplifyapp.com. The login works just like it did earlier, as well as any other feature around the APIs, right? So signing in, this time you type in the password correctly. Yes. I'm very proud of you for that.
Thank you.
That's why it's a pre-recorded video. So with that, you got your app hosted. And it went so fast, and that's what I love about this, because we are so focused on developer experience that all you have to bring is just your Git repository. Okay, so now we've got our app built, we've got our app shipped, so everybody can leverage my favorite recommendations for Seattle. Next question is, how do I scale it? And one other way of formulating this question is, but is it production ready? That's in people's heads, right? So let's first talk about the front end. Here's a little checklist that I created that I think is warranting a UI framework from being production ready. And Amplify UI does all of them. We have very methodically looked at the workflows from designers and developers and what they really need inside a UI library. It also goes into areas like customizing the generated code. So it's not a one-way door. If you want to modify something, you can use overrides, or because the code is inside your repository, you can always eject at any time, and that is okay. Right? We've also got other features we've briefly shown here, but also we've got UI event handlers, so you can set them in code or visually. There's also that capability. And theming and responsive components that just work. Now, on the back end, I'm going to first talk a little bit about Amplify's philosophy, how we're looking at the back end. Right? Our goal with Amplify is to make sure we can have the best front-end developer experience with the extensibility of a self-managed backend infrastructure. With traditional backend as a service offerings, you're kind of locked in. There's this one feature I really need and it doesn't exist. No, right? But they do offer a great, front-end developer experience. AWS Amplify is a legitimate abstraction on top of AWS. All the backend resources are deployed within your account. And we give you different mechanisms to really customize them and leverage the extensibility and the scale of AWS to its fullest extent. And what does extensibility mean is a big question. And we've actually analyzed hundreds of organizations, and we're creating this little fancy graph here that we call the progressive exposure of extensibility. And it is really through these 3 different stages that every organization is going through when they want to really scale out. Right? So the first part is, hey, I want to just modify something from this Amplify generated stack. We had this authentication set up, right? But what if I want to set the temporary password validity days? Yes, that's a real setting. You can look it up. And now you can do that. You can just write Amplify override. You get the underlying resource, and you can programmatically tweak every knob that you care about. The next part is, how can I leverage my Amplify stack, my Amplify app, and have it connect to all the 175 plus AWS services to really, match my use case to the scale that it deserves, right? So you can run Amplify add custom, and we scaffold out a CloudFormation template or a CDK construct that can cross-reference your Amplify stack. So it is deployed as part of your Amplify stack, and for instance, you can create an easy workflow that a AppSync or that a GraphQL API event triggers an SNS notification, and so on and so forth, right? And then last, but certainly not least, is a use case that is the pinnacle of advanced extensibility, right? It's really about being able to export your Amplify project so you can use a centralized deployment team's experience to deploy your Amplify app. And so what we allow you to do is to run Amplify export, and we basically take that Amplify project, we package it up in a little CDK app, and you can pass that forward to your centralized deployment team. They can do all the auditing that they're really experienced in, all the governance work that they need to do, all the really important work. And then they can just deploy it through that mechanism, do multi-region, multi-account replication very easily. And so when we are asking ourselves, is this production ready? The answer is yes. And so Amazon Music is one of our largest customers. They have over 100,000 transactions per second, leveraging Amplify's backend and these extensibility features. So does it scale? Yes. Okay. And so with this, we've looked at how can we build an app, how can we ship an app, and how can we scale an app. We also remembered the very first slide I kind of showed you, like the app development process is kind of a little bit frustrating, And I hope that the main takeaway you get away from this breakout session is that we can finally say goodbye to a frustrating app development process. And I also got a fancy animation here, so I'm actually going to do it. Can you guys all do it, please? Come on. I know it's cheesy, but come on. OK, there you go. Bye. OK, so no more frustrating app development processes. And with that, you can get started for free today on this long URL that I will not be able to pronounce, but there's a QR code that makes it super handy. And just to recap, I'm Rene Brandl, and this is Chris Woolham. You can find us on Twitter as well, if you have any questions. Cool. We've got a mic set up on that area, so if you have any questions, feel free to walk up there, and we're here to answer any question.